Bonjour, Wache Anin Tanshi. Welcome to Lakehead University's talk with Dr. Cynthia Wesley-Esquimaux, Truth and Reconciliation in an Era of Distraction. We are in a time of global shifts, fake news, media overload, and growing incivility. Does truth and reconciliation still have meaning? We are happy that you're able to join us today. Denise Baxter, Indishnikos, Makwa Dodem, Martin Falls, and Donjaba. My name is Denise Baxter, Vice Provost, Indigenous Initiatives here at Lakehead University, and I will be your MC for this event. Lakehead University respectfully acknowledges its campuses are located on the traditional lands of Indigenous peoples. Lakehead Thunder Bay is located on the traditional lands of Fort William First Nation, signatory to the Robinson-Superior Treaty of 1850. Lakehead Aurelia is located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, which include the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. Lakehead University acknowledges the history that many nations hold in the areas around our campuses and is committed to a relationship with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples based on the principles of mutual trust, respect, reciprocity, and collaboration in the spirit of reconciliation. In Lakehead's commitment to social justice and social responsibility, we advance the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action and Universities Canada principles on Indigenous education. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendation to build capacity for intercultural understanding, empathy, and mutual respect has become a guiding principle for the commitments Lakehead has made in both Northwestern Ontario and Simcoe County, and will continue to guide our efforts in the future. Before we begin, I would like to share an important notice of video recording for this event. Participants are reminded that this online event is being recorded. We are doing this to preserve a record of the event in the university's archives and to publicize and promote Lakehead University. By attending, you are agreeing to be included in the recording and its public dissemination in any media now known or later developed anywhere in the world in perpetuity. Any questions participants have can be entered into the Zoom chat and we will address towards the end of the presentation. Thank you for joining us. It is now my pleasure to invite Elder Beatrice Twans-Hines from Bictagong First Nation to share an opening prayer. Welcome, Elder Beatrice.
Bonjour, minwa gijemdo, mishom sak no pasak, danawe maganak, wabisko, the bishko jimena to equay nindignicas, giche megizi equay nindignicas gaye, ni mama makwa dodem, ni baba wa wash keshe dodem, Beatrice nindignicas, Bictagong nindonji. Hello again, Creator, grandfathers, grandmothers, all my relations. My name is White Horse Spirit Woman. I'm also called Big Eagle Woman. And my mom is from the Bear Clan, my dad is from the Deer Clan, and my name is Beatrice, and I'm from Bictagong First Nation. And I have a prayer here I'm going to read. Miigwech de Benjigay, thank you, Creator. Gin kinageko gajitoyen for all that you have created. Miigwech de Meshomes Jesus, thank you, Grandfather Son. Gibewase Ajien Nongum for shining on us today. Miigwech nokames de Bik Jesus, thank you, Grandmother Moon. Gibewase Ajien Nin de Bikak for shining on us at night. Miigwech Kogmekwe Gimijan Bimadiziwin. Thank you, Mother Earth, for giving us life. Gimijan Mijim for giving us food. Gimijan Nebe for giving us water. Gimijan Wesinyak for giving us the animals. Minwa Gimijan Nesewin and for giving us breath. Seman in Bagdina. Wabanong, Jawanong, Ipingishmok, Minwa, Giwedinong. I offer my tobacco to the east, south, west, and north. Wido ka Wishinam, Jimishko Gabrion, Minwa, Jizong Deyan. Help us to stand strong and to have a strong heart. Wido ka Wishinam, Jimajish Gayek. Help us to move forward. Miigwech Gijimanato. Thank you, Great Spirit. And Creator, I ask you to continue to guide Cynthia Wesley-Esquimaux share on the truth and reconciliation in the work that she does in spreading out that message there in regards to truth and reconciliation, and Creator continue to guide Lakehead University in the work that they do in promoting Indigenous initiatives. Miigwech, 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 miigwech.
Miigwech. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Always a pleasure, and love to hear, the good, kind words that you bring to us as we, have this important conversation today. I'd like to introduce someone new to Lakehead University. She's only been here just under 3 months, I guess, maybe minus a day or two. Dr. Julian Belfour is our newest provost and vice president academic. And so she is going to be, you'll see a lot more of her on our Zoom recordings as the year goes by. But I'd like to welcome Julian.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I just wanted to give my thanks to Elder Beatrice for opening our event today in such a good way, Miigwech. So September 30th, of course, marks the day for National Truth and Reconciliation, a day to honor the children who never returned home and survivors of residential schools, as well as their families and communities. Public commemorations of the tragic and painful history and ongoing impacts of residential school is a vital component of the reconciliation process. September 30th is a day to honor and remember, but it's important to remember that this work continues throughout the year. At Lakehead, we offer many opportunities for students, staff, and faculty to participate in learning, dialogue, and collaboration. These opportunities aim to deepen understanding of the truths and richness of Indigenous peoples, cultures, worldviews, while also encouraging individuals to reflect themselves on and further their own responsibilities towards reconciliation of Indigenous peoples. We're very fortunate to have many Indigenous speakers, Indigenous leaders, knowledge holders, and community members to help us along the journey of reconciliation and learning. A very important person to that end for Lakehead is that we are very blessed to work with Dr. Cynthia Wesley-Esquimaux. Cynthia was appointed as the first Indigenous chair for Truth and Reconciliation in Canada here at Lakehead University, and continues to develop pathways forward to reconciliation across Canada. Cynthia was the inaugural Nexon Chair for Indigenous Leadership at the Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity in 2008, and she was inducted as an honorary witness by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada in 2014, and is the chair of the governing circle for the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation at the University of Manitoba. She's a member and resident of the Chippewa, the Georgina Island First Nation in Ontario, and has dedicated her life to building bridges of understanding. She sees endless merit in bringing people from diverse cultures, ages, and backgrounds together to engage in practical dialogue and applied research initiatives. Cynthia is deeply committed to public education and active youth engagement from all cultures and backgrounds. Please welcome Cynthia.
Thank you for that. And good morning. Still morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Delighted to be here again. Again, an annual conversation that I think is really important to the future of Lakehead and the work that we all do together. So it's delightful to see everybody. I have a conversation with you. I'm going to try to do a little bit of PowerPointing in there just to give you some images, but if I can't make it work, we'll just carry on forward and not worry about it. So today the conversation is about truth and reconciliation in an era of distraction. We are in a time of massive global shifts, fake news, media overload, and unconscionable incivility. Does truth and reconciliation still have meaning? And I was thinking, if this isn't the question of the day for somebody like me and the work that I do, I don't know what is, but I'm really, really tuned to what's going on around the world. So I want to start with a short but very meaningful phrase, we the people. It's an Americanism, I know that, but it says a great deal to me about the foundations of that country, now apparently in considerable turmoil, and it now feels like an archaic and increasingly lost phrase for everybody, we the people. It has, however, captured my attention and made me look at this country, Canada. I've been observing many things over the last while, and I believe we're definitely in what I've decided to describe as an era of distraction as we, our children, well, I guess all ages, navigate through incessant change, a wave of concepts, ideas, ideals that are being tied together in proverbial knots. We're left to duck and parry the bombardment of questionable information. You know, we're asking, is it real news? Is it actually fake news? Is it really, really real news? So we're kind of in this space of not really having a really good sense of where we're going as we move forward. With AI, or as John Rice calls it, Aboriginal intelligence, but actually it's alien intelligence to me, with media masks and social incivility growing, it's getting harder and harder to tell what's really true and useful. And like you, I'm increasingly aware of too many discussions and thoughts that are flung back and forth as we all try to weed out the nonsense from the real, the hope from the despair, and the enlightenment from the disheartening. And unfortunately, year after year, I think it's getting no easier to discern, interpret, respect, or believe. So I know that those of us over a certain age are now seriously asking ourselves, who would have thought that there would ever be the kind of challenges that we're now navigating? In a medium we want to trust. And I'm including all forms of media, every type of journalism, academia, the forms of public notice, the sources of truths of which our parents, our grandparents, and our ancestors, for the most part, trusted. Humans have apparently been avid sharers of experiences, events, stories, song and dance, as well as lies and gossip. I mean, as an anthropologist, I know that gossip was a social regulator. But as long as humanity has had something and someone to tell, they have been telling stories. The joys of a successful hunt, the survival of a frigid winter, the size of the prize fish that got away. Sharing is not the issue. I'm going to try to move this over to a PowerPoint real quick, just so I have it open for you. I don't know if I could open that the same way as I had it. Yeah, no, I won't be able to open it. Sorry, it won't stay as it is. But anyway, sharing's not the issue. It's who, how, where, and what that are increasingly at question as our minds and that of our children recede further away from the reality we once believed was tangible and in many instances sacred. So technology, it's changed everything, especially when it comes to children. In the Indigenous community, we frequently say every child matters. And that is where we're going with this entire Reconciliation Day. And this is by now what I would call a famous phrase. I hear it everywhere I go. But however, I want you and everyone else to take it one step further. And I want you to ask yourself, what matters to every child? Every child matters. I'm not arguing with that. But what matters to every child? And appreciate what this might change in our homes, in our communities. Because there's another phrase that takes what I'm getting at even further. And it notes, if a child does not feel the warmth of the village, they will burn it down. And I know from a lot of the conversations that I'm having across the country that this is a real problem. This is what our distraction has produced. Not necessarily in fact, but certainly in principle. This is truth. And the reconciliation here has to happen at the dinner tables in our homes and in the mental and emotional well-being of our kids. We have to think about that. I took a note from a Quora post by Dino Dion on August the 7th about our present engagement with media, with success, with approval, and even with things like envy. He writes, but let's not pretend we're innocent. We make media stars rich. We tune in, we click, we like, we share. The media doesn't shape us, it reflects us. This contrast isn't just ironic, it's damning. We worship the court jesters, we exile the prophets. We devour the trivial and we ignore the profound. We live in a culture where flash triumphs over substance and noise drowns out brilliance. And until this changes, we remain what we are, a consumerist society in free fall. addicted to distraction, allergic to intellect, and fast forgetting the price of such neglect. Now, I understand that misinformation, along with propaganda and deliberate fabrication, has been around for centuries as well. And although the term fake news has gained traction as a verb since the 1990s and the introduction of the internet, we all use it, cultivate it, and read it. We also know the term took right off and appears to be here to stay once a certain administration got a hold of it and turned everything they could upside down. So, who and what are we to believe these days? And what has this got to do with truth besides everything, or for that matter, with reconciliation? And we'll try to move into that and help you understand why I think it still remains important. In addition to all that manufactured confusion, we as a collective, as people, have also allowed ourselves to become minute minds, or maybe second minds really, as the development, introduction, and easy access to the internet has grown and taken over our lives. Today, all things media have replaced conversation, loving gazes, healthy touch, and concern for our neighbors. Instead, we're swooning in every direction as things we never dreamt of or even ever thought we might have wanted to have become incessant assaults on our senses, invading our every waking moment with must-haves or wants, and the procurement of useless trinkets and general stuff, and the resulting in unlimited clutter that also clutters our minds. Now we find ourselves led by TikTok and Instagram to embrace the envy of other people's seemingly perfect lives while we're holding smoking, overused, and underpaid credit cards and fielding increasingly tenuous and broken familial relationships, along with unhappy solitudes that result from technological dopamine addiction. I see it all the time. I see it in people's homes. I see it in my friends' kids. It's happening. And as we move deeper into AI, artificial intelligence, or alien intelligence, if you really want to call it out, we're increasingly abdicating our ability to even use our own minds for the simplest things. Now AI writes our notes, our emails, our papers, and pretty soon, if you listen to the experts, our future. Importantly, we don't seem to be aware either of the incredible time, space, and huge energy usage required to house our multiple distractions either. And this is important. AI requires powerful services and infrastructure within data centers, which are major electricity consumers. How major? We don't even really know yet, other than it's already beyond anything we've ever experienced before. AI houses everything. The little joke you sent yesterday, important documents, pictures you never look at, everything you forgot and will never view again, sucking endless energy to appease our technological appetites. The cloud isn't some nebulous space up there somewhere floating above us. It's hardcore data centers being established out of sight and therefore out of mind, and quite frequently on traditional territories they have no business actually accessing. Are they respecting traditional jurisdiction? Are they respecting environmental futures or social justice or the well-being of our planet and people? Isn't this truth and a question of reconciliation also in action? By 2030, it's estimated data centers could consume 945 terawatt hours of electricity annually, equivalent to the current total annual consumption of Japan. And judging the speed of implementation and the energy and water wars we're kindling across this planet, this appetite will grow exponentially. Are we thinking of our children and grandchildren? Every child matters. What matters to every child? I was asked about environmental challenges by a first-year law student at Lakehead earlier this month. So thankfully, it's like from my perspective, there are young people pushing forward this dialogue, and the fight will continue through them to protect the planet for habitation, for something other than making more and more and more money. I find myself often asking, do we ever get to enough? Is it possible to stop overconsumption and the race for more? I don't know. It doesn't look good. Data centers use vast amounts of water for cooling their equipment, with significant increases in water usage reported by major tech companies, although they're not yet saying by how much, and frankly, I don't think they ever will. I wanted to share with you an example that comes really out of my past knowledge base, but really hit home and I never forgot. The example is the U.S. Peabody coal mines in the 1960s and 70s. They brought some high-paying jobs and revenue to the Hopi and Navajo reservations at the time, and they created a temporary period of prosperity. We're all familiar with that in Indigenous communities. When they finally closed down in 2020, they left almost total destruction for the Hopi people. The Peabody Coal Company told the Hopi that they would take from the aquifer what a teaspoon from the ocean would represent. A teaspoon from the ocean would represent to slurry their coal to southern Nevada and ultimately to New York City. Instead, they drained the entire water table. Peabody's extensive water use for coal slurrying depleted a vital aquifer and threatened the sacred Hopi springs and groundwater, and of course their future. So who was to blame? What was the truth? Where's the reconciliation? How do we reconcile that which cannot be replaced? What might we be watching and waiting for in these instances when there's destruction of the irreplaceable? And that's only one example, and that's a while ago, and we're still in that kind of context right now. Now, I understand we're not all being pulled into forgetting and drowning in TikTok and Instagram images. I get that. You know, some of us actually retain some sense of reality, and no one to say no and put down our technology for a meaningful conversation and a big hug. I mean, that's the most important thing we can do, I think, in a day. And it's good because I often feel I'm watching the disintegration of civility and a caring society in real time on the news channels I watch, and sometimes through the media I'm bombarded with on my iPhone. I see a lot of angry people out there. So what we have to remember is that we have a country here, Canada, our village, that was founded on Indigenous principles. It's built on sharing, reciprocity, hope, respect, peacekeeping, and trust. Even the United States, which has now experienced a major shift or maybe a dump in their values, has had access to the same principles from the very beginning, espoused through the great law of the Haudenosaunee. When Benjamin Franklin took an interest in it and decided to modify and include some of the condolences or clauses, if you will, for inclusion in the American Constitution. This is research, this is real, this is what happened. However, we also recognize that the most important thing he left out was women, who in his days were not entirely regarded as persons. In fact, in the early Canadian Constitution in our own country, Indigenous peoples were also disregarded as persons. They were included in the Constitution as subject matter. And so this is a grievance of former Anishinaabe chief Aubrey Copway from Curve Lake. Never let us, as Indigenous technicians, when I was working for the United Anishinaabe Councils, ever let us forget. And as a teenager, I had a hard copy of that particular rendition of the Constitution, and I knew he was absolutely correct in his assessment and declaration because I had read it with my own eyes before ever hearing any one of our leaders openly speak to it and reject its incorrect premise. And I do also remember wondering, why are we called subject matter? So obviously those things have been changed with the repatriation of the Constitution to Canada. So I believe as Indigenous peoples, we've long understood and lived off-stated and important concepts of truth and reconciliation and peace and friendship and even sovereignty and righteousness, which while they may not have been delivered with that peculiar English flair for the absolute, because truthfully anything can change or be misinterpreted, those concepts definitely held deep meaning to us as Indigenous peoples and were values that were honored and expressed through lived experiences, as well as through the treaties and political relationships forged in the early contact period and through multiple connections within the spiritual, human, and natural world. You know, those treaties, there's a lot of, again, conversations around those treaties and what they actually represented and what they meant. and who negotiated them, and whether or not do they have meaning today in an era of distraction, in an era of warfare, in an era of change. So I want to talk to a couple of those. We had and still have the dish with one spoon and the two-row wampum, which were in place long before people had the ability to hide behind false technological faces, and before we learned to diss our relations and our neighbors. The dish with one spoon is an important one, and I raise it often because it speaks to recognition of territorial jurisdiction and respect for boundaries. And that is something that was, established between the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee long before anybody else got here. We understood respect for boundaries. It speaks to taking only what you need. Respect the land and resources and leave something of value for others. You don't need to take it all. You don't need to destroy everything. And it also requests that we keep the dish clean. And none of these concepts, none of these tenets, the newcomers to these lands now called Canada, or in the United States where capitalism and environmental degradation is now king, seem to understand or take seriously. So it's something that I see really strongly as a foundational document, a foundational agreement for a country that we live in that we want to protect. And Canada, because Canada has had its own agents of destruction and a thirst for money as an end. We have the same kinds of things happening in Canada that are happening south of our border, but we have to recognize that. We have to look at the foundations that have been established by that relationship between Indigenous peoples and the government of Canada and other and provincial governments and everybody else. Yet how many Indigenous people have repeatedly pointed out that you cannot eat money? And yet we see this race happening in so many places. Indigenous peoples are still iterating these tenets and remind people of their obligations and responsibilities across this entire country. And in 90 countries around the planet where 500 million Indigenous people still reside, and where they're still saying the same things. We are agents of our own destruction when we cannot see beyond what we want today. And I think it's really worth having a listen to what those voices are saying. The two-row wampum, the Guswenta, is and was foundational to our ability to not only relate, but respect and appreciate. It's straightforward. Peace, well, from Gerald Alfred's perspective, it's peace, power, and righteousness. Or from other perspective, it's peace, friendship, and respect. And there are other words like perpetuity that are frequently used as well to describe the expected relationship between our peoples, our governments, and other governments we might encounter. The two rows of purple wampum tell us that we have to respect those boundaries and understand that we are separate governments. We have our own spiritual practices, our own knowledges, our own education. But it's really those white beads that the purple beads are set in to tell us that we have to have peace, respect, and friendship. Otherwise, we can't move forward. That there needs to be non-interference and recognition of jurisdictions and authorities. They're not novel concepts. They were living agreements that supported and upheld peaceful coexistence. The commitment the Haudenosaunee made was to that peaceful coexistence, to burying their war clubs beneath the roots of the white pine so that they would be difficult, if not impossible, to access. They made a commitment to listening and resolving grievances and moving towards harmony. Once again, also the tenets of the dish with one spoon. How do we get along? How do we live together? How do we coexist respectfully? So this didn't completely, obviously, preclude conflict or war times. I mean, Indigenous people are people after all as well, with the same emotions, the same propensity to anger and foibles that affect all of humanity. We're just like everybody else, but we have made a commitment to peaceful coexistence. It's something that we've continuously strived for despite an uneven and sometimes brutal history with Canada. Straightforward principles. They don't have to be written into 100-page documents to be enlivened. They simply must be lived. What a concept. Living with a good mind. We're now observing what living with a crooked mind brings. Just look south of our border and see the destruction of immigrant removal policies and the pursuit of impossible sums of money, the sickness of greed, and the loss of compassion. So unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, because of the era in which we're living, as civility and peaceful coexistence with our larger neighbor, the US, rapidly fades, we, as Canadians, are being reminded of how letting distraction and incivility grow more prominent in people's lives creates distance. But hopefully, it also dissolves complacency in our own lands. We have to pay attention. We must pay attention. We must ensure that this country resolves to remain a peacekeeper on the world stage. An Indigenous foundation on these lands needs to be revived, and our values have to remain consistent because we're already witnessing significant erosion even here. We're not exempt from actually being affected by the incivility that has been generated over the last decade. So we need to do that. But my question is, with this conversation, is how do we bring back truth? Eliminate the concept of fake news. How do we recenter a sense of reconciliation broader than renewing relations between Indigenous and Canadian society? Because we want to look, I think we want to look globally. I think we want to look larger. I mean, it is important, it is significant. But we have to ask, how do we protect the truth of the true value of honesty, inclusion, civility, and care for each other? Because we all know there can be no reconciliation without truth. The kind of truth that acknowledges mistakes and exclusion and deliberate harms and brings us together in a united front that gives this country we all have the kind of strength it needs to protect us from devolving into what we are witnessing on a global scale. Where is meaning and life in all that conflict, child starvation, and cruelty? So, back to our work in Canada. The truth of Indian residential schools and lost children may pale before those wars and unrelenting harms, including the starving children happening in other countries. And while we may be moving beyond speaking frequently to the truth of Indian residential schools and hospitals and missing children and graves, deeper issues, they have not gone away in this country. We may not be front and center in the news, but we still recognize that those deeper issues that kind of imbalance our senses in this country are still very present. There's a population that is speaking to it. The last decade of media coverage and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has done what it could to take Canada to a place of awareness. But there's still unfinished business. And despite a crumbling sense of global trust, we have to tend to our own challenges and ensure this country understands that meeting its own obligations actually role models possibility for those in other places. You know, we have been called forth to other countries to speak to what Canada is doing. What is the recipe? What is the magic? What is it that Canada is doing that actually is changing the face of that incivility and maintaining actually something important? Well, this is the time of hundreds, if not thousands, of TV channels, relentless media representation. And I'm grateful that in 2025, there's been a plethora of Indigenous creativity, the production of movies, songs, and other forms of media available to demonstrate that we have not forgotten, even if society is distracted by other issues and concerns and mindless media offerings. There are still things that have to be addressed. So truth and reconciliation has been generated across the country because of Indigenous concerns for what has happened in the past. It is a piece of many things that are happening across the planet and across this country, but it is important. And Indigenous people remain determined to make clear and remind Canadians that atrocities occurred here too. Mistakes were made, government meddling hurt, racism and exclusion were endured, and children were harmed and forgotten. So we're not without blame and some shame as well as other countries. However, I think that there's a powerful message in those words, actions and acknowledgements. The demands Indigenous people have in this country, that they have delivered, are like a mirror being held up to remind humanity that behaviors that exclude, damage, and kill have long-lasting effects. It's not over because a school closes, an apology is made, a particular war ends, or a people begins to revive. There are reparations, restorations, supports, and new beginnings to forge. This is what gives truth and reconciliation meaning in an era of distraction, at a time of brutal wars, or most certainly in the harming of children. In the United States, they're dismantling the history of slavery as too disturbing. They're dismantling any and all challenges to colonialism, exclusion, and even free speech. The United States government only wants to tell what it perceives or interprets as good things about its history, but by whose definition we should also be asking. Because what kind of story only tells one side? The circle of life holds darkness as well as light. We all know this to be true. How can we speak of reconciliation when there's no understanding or acceptance of what is being reconciled? Or if we don't have a concrete vision of how or what we must build to ensure an enduring foundation upon which to set and nurture any agreement that's been created? How can we ensure the foundation and the house is strong, visible, and lasting? I believe we now have to go a long way back to find those precious jewels of wisdom that were forged over time and through living through some very difficult times. The original instructions, if you will, that tell us how our obligations and responsibilities are important and that we need to pay attention to what they are. We've forgotten, in many instances, those original instructions about our humanity. So we need to beware. We need to be vigilant. For we too, as Canadians, and even as Indigenous peoples in many nations across Canada, must never forget our own vulnerability, our own willingness to follow the masses, to embody lives of superiority, of privilege, and to abandon our inner spiritual principles out of fear of losing something or being excluded. Uncovering truth on the dangers of dehumanizing others remains a vital lesson from human history for all of us. This truth complicates a meaningful debate on what constitutes genocide everywhere in the world. There have been many failures. We're being shown that even those who struggle with poverty, addictions, or racism, they can learn to hate each other in their misery. There's no grace in our suffering or at any level of prosperity if we forget our spiritual truths. If you're familiar with our legends and our creation stories, you know the dark and the light are always represented. Twins are born with darkness and light in their spirits. They create, they destroy. We test the viability of the sky world and the depths of the waters. We tell the story of the birth of Nanabush, who was both spirit and human. Nanabush, and there are many names for Nanabush right across the country, the trickster. Nanabush is a mythical and cultural hero of the Anishinaabe people with both spiritual, supernatural abilities and human virtues and flaws. His mother was an Anishinaabe woman. His father was a spirit being, giving him powers from the Great Spirit, from the Great Mystery, while also connecting him to the human world. So he teaches us as human beings to learn through our mistakes as well as our successes. Nanabush and other trickster figures show us that patting ourselves on the back for what only some declare as good is pure folly and often dooms us to speak, and often dooms those who speak to the reality of harsh truths, to social invisibility or banishment. When you speak the truth, the hard truths, people find it very uncomfortable. And I've often heard people say today, we got to learn how to be uncomfortable because there is a lot of uncomfortability happening. We also learn from the trickster that there's great harm in denying our fallibility, of being boastful or being vain. The lesson is always about humility and accepting our imperfections as real and as human. Our obligations as Indigenous peoples are to remember and to be of service. Our traditional practices demonstrate the more we give, the more our stature as a spiritual and human being will brighten and rise. The more we lift the vibration of our nations by lifting ourselves out of negativity, the more we all thrive. And I've returned to the potlatch in British Columbia, or the giveaway of the Anishinaabe peoples here in Ontario and on the East Coast. And I stand in recognition of those leaders who give unconditionally to the people, even to the point of impoverishing themselves, because they're lifting others and ensuring all have something. And I watch them be lifted and loved in turn by their people. Truth and reconciliation in action. Can't forget that. It really is a part of who we are. Presently, the truth of the matter is, another truth is that Indigenous peoples don't see or feel reconciliation with Canada. They just don't. It's words in some ways that feel co-opted. It's words that don't necessarily have application in their day-by-day experiences. So for the most part, our people have rejected this discourse and have turned inward to their own needs. And I see this as a good thing. I mean, it's about time. You know, I believe we're seeing through all the rhetoric that the only ones we need to reconcile with, and understanding that the only ones we need to reconcile with are those we have hurt amongst ourselves through learned negative behaviors, the harms of addictions, violences taught through in residential schools and other circumstances, the influence of rampant capitalism in our communities that are increasingly coming there, and the instilling of highly competitive expectation mores in our youth by Canadian society and education. We're seeing that we have work to do. We have our own truths to confront and to heal. We have our own truth and reconciliation processes to work on. And yet it's frequently Indigenous peoples who are called upon to not only lead the way to reconciliation between Canada and Indigenous peoples, but also to mitigate the truth-telling many Canadians find unsettling. There are many ways those conversations can be addressed, but it gets challenging when we're in this era of distraction and people really don't have or cannot find the words, I guess, to actually deal with the consequences and the understandings that are necessary. So Canada does require reconciliation and a self-directed pathway to support healing for those they've hurt, which means not only the first peoples of these lands and waters who remain a focus for damages done historically, absolutely, but damages, and because those damages continue to resonate into the present and are still represented in a lot of the students I get opportunities to talk to, and the organizations and corporations and people that are present that actually understand that those damages are still resonating in the present. They're still hearing about them. They're still being compounded by societal violences such as the missing and murdered Indigenous women process, and how that has not stopped. In fact, it's accelerated. And sometimes I tell people it kind of concerns me that we've almost given an opportunity to predators because we've told them almost unequivocally that when an Indigenous woman is missing or murdered, that very little is done to actually follow up and trace what happened and find the perpetrators. So that frightens me a lot. And child welfare. And we're also dealing with increasing denialism. I was just on a call with the National Center on Denialism, and Francis Widdowson coming with a camera to demonstrate that there's no such thing as Aboriginal spirituality, or that that white people made up Indigenous spirituality so that they could make money. Some of the things that she espouses are absolutely ridiculous, but there it is. But there's also others Canada has to reconcile with, and I believe we have to stand with those peoples as well. They are part of our country. because it's our mutual future as an entire nation that has to be shielded from the rhetoric coming in from below our south border and from people like Francis Whittleson and other deniers who don't believe and who attack instead of actually understanding or trying to learn. So this is why all of this that I've said is why reconciliation still has meaning in this era of distraction and change. It reminds us of our humanity, of the persons across the table, across the room, and across the country that are friends, relatives, allies. We must be reminded that there is work to do, a country to protect, a looming war potentially to fight, whether it's civil, economic, cultural, resources. There's a land grab to stop and a unity to hold on to. Can we work together? Can we take the foundations of the dish with one spoon and the Goswenta and other actual tools that we have delivered to you as a country and utilize them to create a restorative process? The complacency we've been lulled into as a country through relative prosperity, news that only gives us half the story or is entirely fake, the luxury of having entertainment at our fingertips, and a broad separation of beingness may be the very things that render us helpless in the face of rapid and seemingly unstoppable progress. Do we recognize the loss, our loss in this? What do we want as a people, as a country? Indigenous peoples have stood strong in the winds of change for the past 500 plus years, and they've endured. So I think we have much to offer in this time of uncertainty. According to Rob Bryce, who was speaking at the Banff Center more recently, according to his grandmother, and of course his own writings on post-apocalyptic understandings, we've weathered and survived one apocalyptic event after another. We have stories to tell. We have wisdom to share with the rest of the country. We understand it's past time to throw off the yokes of marginalization and dependency on a fickle government who gives with one hand and takes away with the other. We have wise practices that have been gifted to us through our ancestors. We have stories, myths, as well as transformative restoring, deep traditions and values that have weathered time and dispossession. We have walked another day, and we will walk some more tomorrow. It is now to be left in the hands of this country to plot a course of action that sets the table for meaningful dialogue, acceptance of historic and contemporary truths, meaningful and targeted fiscal supports, meaningful healing supports, and a meaningful reconciliation process that engages the entire country. It isn't always about money and how much is given to a cause. It's also about strengthening the receiver, ensuring the health and well-being of those who are in need. We have seen simply building or providing a house doesn't end harm. If the foundation is set on a shaky or sandy or uneven ground, there's no way to make it a home. And clearly, I mean this more about psychological and emotional foundations than I do the physical manifestation of a built dwelling, because we're deeply into the manifestations of a mental health crisis where we have never experienced before anywhere. All ages are affected. And this is another arena where Indigenous knowledge has offered a gift that is increasingly being utilized. The somatic, whole body, mind, learning, and spiritual experience of on the land teachings, values, emotional healing, and grounding are finally being overtly recognized by doctors and Canadian society for what they bring. The land, as we've been saying to you for millennia, offers life. It offers protection. It offers a future. Our job is to ensure we put our full selves, minds, abilities into protecting our lands, waters, and resources. In an era of distraction, why is truth and reconciliation so important? Why does it still have meaning? Because it brings us back to self, to ceremony, to awareness, to hope, the very foundations of our humanity. I'm aware that incredible amounts of money have been spent in a multitude of circumstances that have had little or nothing to do with Indigenous peoples. And I'm aware that incredible amounts have been directed specifically towards the Indigenous population in this country as well as others. And this is often referred to as reconciliation or reconciliation, the provision of reparations for harms, and is an undertaking we're witnessing and must begin to understand, because we know the senses and values and civility of humanity is in a time of peril. But I would offer that without full recognition of why you're being called upon to create those circumstances or build that house or provide that money, the effort is moot. Or if you provide that house and money and call it charity, be fully aware that it loses its purpose as a gesture of reconciliation or kindness or acknowledgement. It ceases to be healing and only creates divisions. There is a planetary need for equitable, not equal, distribution of wealth, compassion, and acceptance. All of us who call this amazing country home have an opportunity before us, a possibility that Canada will be the example on the world stage of peaceful coexistence and inclusion. Personally, I see no value in racing to be the first trillionaire in the world or the one who builds the first new world on planet Mars. I am appalled, personally, that 1% of individuals hold the vast majority of economic wealth on the entire planet. But I see endless value in embracing our humanity. This is where the wealth of a more particular kind comes from valuing ourselves, our families, our friends, and valuing the health of this planet, from understanding what truth really means and looks and feels like, and why working together matters. Because this is what matters to every child. This is why truth and reconciliation must continue to have meaning. Our country must come together and learn from each other, appreciate the hard lessons of loss, and revive the beauty of unity and building a strong future together. So miigwech, I'll leave it at that, and maybe we can have some conversations about why you think truth and reconciliation has meaning in an era of distraction. So thank you.
Miigwech. Thank you so much, Cynthia. Every time I get a chance to hear you speak in this way, it's always incredible to me, the breadth and depth of ideas that you bring forward. We do have quite a few people in the chat who have started to put comments. We've had a few questions in there. So if I may, I'm going to go right to them so we have enough time. We have a question here. What kind of solutions can we apply to our lives to help with distractions?
What kind of
Solutions?
solutions?
Yeah.
Well, I would say the most important solution in this era of distraction is to actually look at each other. I travel a lot, and everywhere I see people sitting with these things on their laps. I watched a little baby the other day at the airport trying to get his mother's attention, doing all kinds of things he could. He was just a very small child, and she never even looked at him once, and he finally gave up. If a child gives up, they're going to find something somewhere else, and it's not going to be nearly as good as a mother's hug. So you have to start to think about, how do we put these things down and start a conversation with people that is a real conversation that engages lots of emotion. I almost lost my emotion at the end of this conversation. I was like, oh, I'm gonna cry. But just, be emotional, be connected, be a person in a conversation with somebody else.
Wonderful. We had a comment from Eli Baxter. The truth is in our languages, Anishinaabe is to be used. We had another person Ethan Chan, who has a question. It's broad but significant. With fake news becoming increasingly common rather than the exception, will there be a future where we can overcome its dangers, falsities, and lies, or will we continue to be subject to them? Similarly, will the expansion of AI become a dominant tool in pursuing the TRC goals, or will it become another barrier that we as Canadians must overcome?
Yes, and yes. Yeah, I don't think we're going to get rid of. That's the challenge. That's what I'm saying. How do we do this? How do we actually recognize the fact that we are being bombarded by news that is not real, and that we have to be able to be discerning, that we have to behave. I think the only way we get out of that is by actually having those conversations with each other. I mean, education doesn't necessarily only happen in classrooms. It also happens on the street. It also happens in restaurants and other tables. If we're not talking to each other, we're not getting a wide, broad breadth of opinion. If we're not talking to seniors, if we're not talking to children, we're not getting what we actually need to be able to formulate the kind of powerful ideas that will keep us safe from AI and from being actually distracted into actually the complacency is real. Let me say that. We can sit in our house and we can, stay on the computer all day. And I see kids doing that all the time. And we don't ever have to interact with the fact that there's a real world out there, that people are dying, that children are starving, that there's good things happening, that the sun is rising and we should be enjoying it. We're missing out on actually living. And yes, if you have the profound privilege of speaking your language, you have the kind of access that many of us never were granted because of residential schools and other experiences, adoption, and all those pieces. So, live your life is what I guess we have to do to be able to get past that.
Great, thank you. And this is a nice segue. We have Joseph Lane who said, I don't know if this is a place of the time, but I found something called me, M-I-I, or me, M-E, which means this very moment in time. I had a professor challenge me with the question, who am I? Every answer I could come up with was a description of me, but who is me? In language, it's used as a positional word to place an identity of me. But what and who is me? I found me with the language. When I say I am me, I'm saying that past, present, and future, in this moment, I am all that I can and I will be. If I learn to heal the me, I heal my we, the community around us, our friends, family, Kitawaya, all my relations. Healing is a ripple effect that flows outward from the me. All it takes is a drop of water to cause waves. Amplified by so many other drops, we become a stronger force together for good. When we heal, we stop being reactive from fear and we can make choices to better with a clear mind. So thank you for sharing that.
You're absolutely right. And I remember long ago, but I was probably in my 30s, probably 30s, because I had children, actually listening to a tape of something, and the guy said, ask, who are you? And I started to cry. I said, I don't know who I am. I don't know. And I had to really embark on that journey of saying, okay, well, who am I anyway? And I'm not just a wife, and I'm not just a mother, and I'm not just, I'm so many things. And and having that, taking that journey, really did and does turn us into a global individual. It turns us into an entity that actually embraces all of what's happening around us, all of life, and centers us tremendously where we need to be. So yeah, I agree. It's absolutely incredibly important.
Great, my gosh, thank you for sharing. Joey asked if the Civil War or the war part of when you were speaking, if you could reiterate that, Canada and the US peoples going through it.
Oh, well, yeah, we're not actually yet in a civil war, but there's a potential I see happening in the United States as people are starting to step up to the plate and say, we do not like what is happening. We do not like people being taken off our streets. We do not like our services being terminated and the tax breaks going to the wealthy. There's a potential for that. And of course, with Trump calling us the 51st state, for that duration of period of time, it raised the ire of Canadians. It actually brought us together, I think, in a pretty fundamental way, which was nice to see, because all of a sudden we realized the threat of actually losing something that we value. So I think, maybe there will be no civil war in the United States. We don't know yet what's going to be happening. I think it's really important that we pay attention. And don't just rely on TikTok or other kinds of things or Instagram, I guess, or all those things to tell you what's going to be happening. Pay attention, listen to lots of news, talk to lots of people, and be informed, because it's important. I see a lot of Indigenous people writing post-apocalyptic work that tells me that they're also concerned. If it all goes to hell, where are we going? So, they're all heading north into into the wilds, probably north of Thunder Bay. Somebody said to me Thunder Bay was as north as they'd been. I said that's only halfway up the country. There is north of north. So there's a lot of people that are actually starting to contemplate the idea that we live in an era again of potential warfare. And watching what's happening in the United Nations and other places is really important for us to really keep a grip on what we might have to do. In this country, we all need to be able to think about protecting it.
Great, thank you. You made a comment, if a child does not feel the warmth of the village, they will burn it down. Many of us, interact with young people regularly, whether they're people in our own circles, our own families, our jobs, and certainly, younger university students, well, not children, but are young adults. Certainly, I think people need to feel that warmth of the village. But do you have any suggestions, maybe? I know we have people on here from many different sectors across the country listening today. But any suggestions on the practical things about recognizing the humanity of not just the adults in your life, but the children and the young people that are also in your life?
I mean, I did a talk on the a strategy. What is the strategy to correct the opioid addictions in our communities, or the alcohol or the violence? Because domestic violence hasn't gone away. In fact, it's actually still very, very high levels. And I said to them, the only strategy that's really going to work is the engagement from preconception to conception to pregnancy to post-conception, to the birth of a child and on. You have to pay attention from the beginning on. Otherwise, children are left to their own devices. I see far too many children that have not got the opportunity to actually learn by play. They're corralled in houses now, and they're watching the technology. They're watching life happening. They're not actually living it. We have to get those kids outside into the world. We have to be able to be speaking to them on a regular basis. It doesn't mean that it's going to save everybody, because if we talk about all the other pieces around intergenerational effect, if we talk about the process of epigenetics and what happens with intergenerational effect and how it goes on for 14 generations, we know that we still have a long way to go. But we have to do what we can now. Starting today, even if you have a conflicted relationship, we need to help resolve that. I have a conflicted relationship with one of my daughters. Every once in a while, I try to step in and try to see if I can resolve that. Right now, we're not in that place where we can. My other 3 daughters are doing well. So you're not going to be able to have everybody be okay. There's going to be challenges along the way, because there are intergenerational effects going back 7 generations through residential schools and those other experiences. But touching base, I took my kids out to dinner on a regular basis because we had a captive audience. I spent time speaking to them and telling them my story. You need to know your story, and your kids need to know your story so that they can relate to you. If you are just this person over there that never makes a mistake or never says sorry or never really engages with them, then they're not going to be able to emulate anything that you are, because you are a non-entity. When you are a person who cries, who says sorry, who makes mistakes, all of a sudden you've got a child that can look up to you and say, it's okay if I make a mistake. It's okay if I don't know, because we need to have that. So there's a lot of reasons why talking to our children is important, but it means starting with our teenagers before they get pregnant, and ensuring that they have those understandings and that knowledge base, and then helping them through a pregnancy so that there's peace. Not the peace of I hate you and I'm going to be silent, but the peace of I love you and therefore I'm going to create a peaceful environment for you, and on and on and on through time. We've talked across the country about re-implementing rites of passage. Rites of passage have not been put in place for a lot of our children. A lot of our children went through care, who went through adoption, have no sense of connection. They don't have the language. They don't even have a sense of the culture that they come from. I met a young man the other day who said, I had no idea until I was 30 who I was. And then I reconnected with my family. So his goal is to actually reconnect as many young people as he possibly can. He's working hard at reconnecting people to their communities and to their families that were taken through the adoptive process, through the 60s scoop and others. So, talking to our young people I had two 19-year-olds at the BAM Center one time, and I just made a point of coming back to them and saying, what do you think? How do you feel? Is this okay with you? And they came out of their quietness very beautifully. At the last day, that one kid who never said much came over to me and looked me dead in the eye and shook my hand and said, thank you. Because he felt seen. If our kids don't feel seen, they're going to find somebody that will. So I think those are important considerations.
Great, thank you. My brain is swirling with so many things on that, but just most recently this week on the news, I think on CBC, I heard statistic, I think it was 39% of children across Canada last year achieved the 60 minutes a day of recommended physical activity. And so spending time together, being outside together, that connection to land, I think certainly is a themes that we heard coming through your talk today.
Yeah.
Related to the latter part of your response there, we have another question from Antoine. How can we shine light on violence within our communities and work towards building a more positive social environment?
We have to talk about it. These conversations are the most important and most difficult conversations I've had in the last 45 years of working with community, is how do we talk about the violence? How do we demonstrate clearly and unequivocally that it is not a traditional way of being? We do not beat each other. We do not beat our children. That we respect women. That we have original instructions that talk about that. We also have stories about long ago about hunting accidents. You beat a woman or you hurt a child, somebody's going to invite you hunting and you might not come back. So there was punishment for doing things that were not okay. The people had great respect for what they were doing in their lives and in the people in it. There was an equality between men and women. Women had their own roles and responsibilities, and so did men, and so did those in between, those people that were different, of a different kind of a gender. They also had roles and responsibilities. Everybody had to work together to ensure that there was a survival. And so really that's my message, is that if we can't work together, we can't build a good future. We can't stop the violence. We can't stop the sexual violence in our communities. Those messages that came through residential schools and came through other types of societies are important for us to unpack. We raise our boys and we raise our girls. If a boy sees his father beating on his mother, there's a very good chance that he will do the same. Not 100%, but there's a very good chance. Children are watching all the time. They're doing what they want to do what we do, or they make a different kind of decision. I mean, I saw a lot of alcoholism and violence in my household, and I decided I did not want that in my life. So we have a choice. Choice is a very powerful word, and I think we need to utilize it more often. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Just a comment from Lakehead University's Chancellor, Dr. Rita Shelton-Deverell. So thank you for joining us today. She just comments, Dr. Cynthia, thank you, and I have great respect for you. So, and I did see we also had the Board of Governors, a few members, but the chair here as well. So another comment from Ethan, strength in numbers. The only way to come together is to see each other as equal, no one as higher nor lower. We need to function as equals for life to become a balanced state. As unrealistic as that sounds, balancing status between all individuals creates a more balanced society. And then thank you. They also thanked you. Now they had to go to another thing that they had to do. A question from Sophie Cluche. How can we uplift Indigenous voices within our communities to share and spread their stories, their teachings, knowledges within settler community? I think we as settlers need to hear the history and Indigenous voices.
Well, it's already there. I mentioned that there's a plethora of movies and songs and amazing things out there. There's books that are being written by Indigenous peoples that are everything from their experience being taken away from their home through adoption and to the child welfare system, to environmental concerns and what they really want to see happen, to protections of water, to spiritual practices. And from some of our John Mohawk and some of our elders have written down, those messages and said, this is what you need to understand about who we are and why we keep coming back to you and actually trying to forge relationships that are workable. Those wampum belts and all of those pieces are incredibly important to the foundations of this country. And I honestly, for the life of me, can't understand, when there's so much knowledge available, why people are still not actually embracing it or understanding it. But inviting speakers into your organizations, inviting elders into your lunchrooms, inviting them to come and join you for a meal, those are really important opportunities. We have opportunity right across the country to be a part of multiple conversations. There are multiple reconciliation circles that have been established. All you have to do is type into grandfather Google reconciliation circle, and they come up, and you can join them. We have one in the Aurelia area that is run by Senator Boniface, and the church downtown. I can't think it was the United Church, has a entire arts program going on that's around truth and reconciliation. Kind of no real excuse today to not know anything about truth and reconciliation, or about residential schools, or about missing and murdered Indigenous women, or about unmarked graves and lost children. At the National Center, we've identified over 4,500 children that were not able to go home. Their names are now being correlated to those burial sites and to other incidents. So there's lots. Again, grandfather Google, there's lots of information on the internet about who Indigenous peoples are. No excuses anymore about going into a community and saying, I don't know anything about you. You could do a little bit of research and learn a little bit about what's happening in those communities. But and there's a conference coming up in Rama in October, called, I think, Moving Forward or something like that. And 1,000 people go to that thing from all across the country. So there's all kinds of activities going on. I speak at different conferences across the country on a regular basis. I'll be in Edmonton in November. I'll be in Vancouver in December. Just, carrying the message forward and spending time with people and having those conversations. I see a message come up real quick. How do we deal with corruption in our leadership? That's a really interesting question. First of all, is it an assumption or is it real? But I would say the way I dealt with corruption in leadership is I actually stepped forward and became a leader. If you don't like what's happening, step forward and be a leader yourself. I remember years ago having this young fellow say to me, Cynthia, I'm supposed to be a hereditary chief. And they elect these chiefs, and really I should be the chief. And I said to this young man, listen, the government of Canada does not have to anoint you as a leader by, through an election. If you want to be a chief in this community, act like one. Use, role model good behaviors and leadership qualities, and you will be a chief in this community. You don't have to be anointed as one through the Indian Act. So, part of that is all just actually doing what we're supposed to be doing and providing that knowledge forward for our communities. Oh yeah, the summit. Yeah, the Forward Summit. And there's lots of ways that you can be a part of this conversation. And I really encourage you to do everything you can. Coming back to, in my talk, I talked about how important it is because of what's going on around us. If you want to be a part of protecting this country into the future and not dissolving it into the incivility that we see in other places, it means that we have to talk to each other. It means that we have to work together. It means that we have to be leaders in our own right. And it doesn't matter how old you are or how educated you are, is your passion to be there in front and helping people do what they need to do.
That seems like the perfect note to end on. Thank you for that. Always, again, such an informative time when we get a chance to hear what goes on inside your head and the work that you do, not just across, Lakehead University, but across the country and the world as well. I just again want to, on behalf of all of us here today, thank you so much for sharing with us. If you have friends or you'd like to visit this again, we will have it posted up on Facebook. So you can have a chance to revisit this. It's on the YouTube channel as well at the university that we have under Indigenous Initiatives. So every recipient will receive a link since you registered when this is ready to be viewed again.
Right.
I'd like to invite Elder Beatrice to share a closing prayer with us. The conversations certainly are heavy, are important, and are real. And so, thank you, Cynthia, for taking us through that, and Elder Beatrice for looking after our spiritual side while we do this.
Thank you.
Well, Joe, I just like to say that, wow, there's lots of good messages there from Cynthia, lots of good questions and stuff. So in regards to September 30th, yeah, every child matters. So I just want to say the serenity prayer, and I'll say it in Ojibwe and English. Bekadendamawin namewin, serenity prayer. The Benjigate, God, Kibi Kitamak, grant me Bekadendamawin, serenity, Chimina Depnama, to accept the Gishtoswan, Wienstoswan. I cannot change. Jimishkwa Windama, courage. Jigwexidonwa Geshtonwan, to change the things I can. Meanwhile, Nibakwa win, and wisdom Ajikindama, to know the difference. And patience for things that take time, appreciation for all I have, and tolerance for those with different struggles than my own. Miigwech, 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 miigwech.
Miigwech. Thank you so much for that. And again, a big thank you to all of you for joining us today. Just a reminder, this talk has been recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel on our main Indigenous Initiatives web pages here at Lakehead University. We also have upcoming events there, so please check those out. If you happen to be on campus in Thunder Bay, Sheila Pelche-Desmarais is going to be holding an orange shirt beading pin making exercise, and I believe Carlotta also has something happening in Aurelia, so be sure to check that out. And Stacy put in the chat there, if you click on that, we have events that are happening both in Thunder Bay and Aurelia out in the community on September 30th. So as many of you know, that is a day where we have an opportunity and time to go meet people and put our phones down, unless maybe we're taking pictures or whatever, but go out and watch and learn and be together with people in our communities. So I look forward to seeing you out in the communities, and certainly, wherever you may be, I hope that it's a good day for you. Just one final note, I'm wearing one of the t-shirts here, but we are working with the bookstores, both in Thunder Bay and Aurelia, and we have Orange Shirt Day hoodies, t-shirt stickers, and pins available. You could also go to the bookstore, Lakehead University Bookstore online, and order that way. And 100% of the proceeds go directly to our Indigenous Student Emergency Fund for Lakehead University students. So we appreciate the support. The artists, I'm wearing a Chris Chapman design today, but we have other artists that have shared designs with us for this venture. So Bama P, everybody, miigwech, and I wish you all a very happy, healthy, and together with those that you love as we come into September 30th, the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. Miigwech.